Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Today we have Brett and Beau in the studio with us, and we're way excited to have them. These guys have a diverse background based on our conversations. Very interesting backgrounds, have been through lots of different phases in their life, and I feel like they're going to be able to teach us a lot about what it means to be a gentleman and to raise ladies and gentlemen. And so, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Thanks for having us.
We're excited to be here.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll start with Brett, and you can talk to us a little bit about what you guys are doing together, how you met, and, Beau can add on to that.
Okay. Well, Beau and I are work associates and probably best friends at this point. We worked together in law enforcement for many years. Beau was actually my supervisor at one point in time because he was the undersheriff for Salt Lake County. And so I worked in internal affairs, and Beau was instrumental in a lot of great things that took place and specifically in law enforcement. Really looked up to him, and we had an opportunity to come together and work in the private sector. And we own a security business as well as an investigation business, and pretty diverse things that we do, forensics and that type of thing. So we came together, and we recently come together for, Beau's always been a great example in the world of give back and service to the community. And we've come together recently in a new venture, which is called True, which is a sex trafficking organization, nonprofit, that we look to prevent sex trafficking and some education type of things. So we've come together recently on even more things, but he's an integral part of the business that we have here in Salt Lake and throughout Utah. So that's how we've come together in this realm at this point. And then we're just super grateful for this opportunity with you guys, because this is as we've gone through our lives, this is something fantastically important to us, and that really means a lot. And so we're grateful for this opportunity for sure to be with you.
Yeah, when you say a lot of the things that you guys are focusing your efforts and your time on now, if you had gone back and rewound a lot of the lives of the people that you have interacted with, if they had been taught a few gentlemanly principles, a sex trafficker is not a gentleman. That never crosses the mind of somebody who's been taught the value of human life. And so we're trying to be preventative in teaching some of these values, in which you've, obviously done with your own children. But you look at the ills of society and the things that are going on that keep us from progressing as a society. And it's mainly people who make poor decisions that you would say that is obviously not a gentleman, right?
I'd agree.
So let's get a little bit preventative. Beau, it sounds like your life could be made into some type of a reality TV show, which I would totally watch. So tell us a little bit about your background. Brett, thanks for telling us how you guys are connected. Tell us also about your families, if you would.
Right now, I'm a dad of a 14-year-old girl going on 25, and so I kind of knew this.
We got some of those.
I knew this point in my life was going to come, and it's been an adventure. Super excited to see her progress through life, and 14 is a very interesting time. I kind of in law enforcement knew, the only time we ever really got called on girls was between 14 and 15, and sometimes parents couldn't handle those kids, so we were the surrogate parents for at least a few minutes. But so right now I have 3 children. I have 2 that are married, living in Salt Lake, 3 grandkids, and I'm raising a daughter by myself. Been through a couple different marriages, and I think through suffering we find happiness. I'm really excited to be where I'm at in my life right now, and to have this opportunity. Really, and the nice thing is I have a good spread between my 14-year-old and the 31-year-old that I raised, and so that gave me a really fantastic opportunity to really relook. And all kids are different, right? None of them are going to be really raised the same, even if we try. They all go their own routes. But it's been an exciting time for me to really be able to invoke some of those trials, experiences, learning lessons, and to focus on. And the reality of it is I don't think anybody wants to be a single parent, but the truth is it gives me 100% of the responsibility for how that girl's going to grow up. I look forward to that challenge, honestly. And it's a different dynamic than a lot of people have, but a lot of people in turn are raising kids on their own. So I've got to be the mom a lot of times, not just the father. That's an interesting place to navigate. And we don't always, I don't think always succeed. My daughter's an active, competitive dancer. And so I'm a dance dad, but I live in Draper, and
he can dance too.
And well, I can't dance, but I do find a lot of time in circling among the dance moms, and I try to compensate a little bit. I don't do very well at it. I'm trying. Luckily, she's a great girl and independent, and has guided herself really well through this dynamic in her life, and not having a really interactive mom. So it's been interesting, fun, challenging, and yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Thanks, Brett. Beau.
You know, he brings up something without bringing it up, and that's vulnerability, his ability to understand who he is and relate to that and not be too good. You're talking about gentlemen, talking about real men. There's a real man right there, not just because he's sitting here and he's my best friend. It's one of those things where his history shows that. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about real quick. I had a father that was not a good example. He was a horrible example. Had a mother that was wonderful. I mean, I think everybody probably has a great mom. She could do no wrong, and she never did any wrong, you know, through life that I know of. But dad was a horrible example. And as I grew up, I found that my coaches were my mentors. They were my dads. Just lost a couple of old high school coaches that were my dads. Got to see one a couple weekends ago. But the key to those men is they were vulnerable enough. They understood themselves to the point of where they could be a dance dad. You know, they could smell the flowers. They could kiss their wife. They could, you know, one of them would sit down with his wife every night when he got home. Didn't matter if it was midnight, he was a coach, or 7 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock. He'd sit down with his wife every night and they would decompress. No egos, no nothing. Hey, what'd you do today? That's an amazing example to me. So when I talk about vulnerability, I have 6 children. Didn't have a good example. Had a great mom. Had good examples as coaches, and they became my dad anyway. 6 children, 5 boys, 1 girl, 3 grandchildren. I'm divorced. Went through a divorce. I've always been kind of vulnerable and out there, and I'm always willing to tell everybody how I feel, especially sometimes to the worst. But I lost myself in the marriage. You know, we talk about being an individual and continuing, you know, having 2 individual people that can connect and have a marriage, you know, and have children, but maintain some of their individuality, that, you know, their needs and their wants, and to be able to zen out, if you will, I lost my marriage because I was into, you know, I had my careers and 6 kids, and I was tired. I was just tired. It's my fault. I didn't take the time to reboot, to recharge. And that's part, I mean, we had other issues as well, but I take the blame for being very present, almost too present, but not getting that recharge of the battery. And at one point in time, I figured it out. You know, that's our nonprofit, Beau Not Broken. My ex-wife told me, "You're broken," you know, at a certain time right before we got divorced. She said, "You're broken." And I sat around for about a week and a half, and not sat around, but I mulled that over, and all of a sudden something came to me, and it was my name. And I said, I'm not broken. If I was broken, I'd be dead. And I'm bent, I'm broken. It's like an arrow. If you pull an arrow back, the farther back it's stressed, the better off where that trajectory is. And that's a whole analogy or visual I could go over another time. But that whole vulnerability and that ability to understand really kind of catapulted us into a next level. Because I always thought that, you know, I kind of took on my job like a lot of men do. You know, I'm a chief. You know, I got all these stars and bars. Not that it was an ego thing, but hey, I have this authority. I have all these people at my command, and guess what? That's me. Well, that wasn't me. You know, the me was Beau. The me was, the guy that, loved to just sit around and, with my wife or my kids and play and, just what were my loves, what were my likes, all those types of things. And so what happened out of a bad marriage became a really good partnership over the last 8 years of really co-parenting fantastically. We still don't know the ramifications of the children out after a divorce. They're in their 20s, most of them. But I know that, I wanted to focus on that whole vulnerability picture because I think that's one of the biggest things. If we can really understand ourselves, we can talk to people and let them know that, we're struggling with this. Our self-esteem is down here. This is that. And if we have good friends and other gentlemen, real men, then they're able to bring us up or help us out with that. And I've seen so much death and suicide from just men that have lost their way. One day they're calling me on the phone and they're good and, are great. And I use many examples. The next day they've taken their life because they've been ingrained into this world of, my job. If I'm not a good truck driver, or I'm not a good cop, or I'm not a good doctor, or I'm not in that persona, I lose everything. And that's not me. So in a long-winded roundabout intro, I didn't really even talk about much else, but I think the whole vulnerability thing is key.
Well, let's talk a little bit about law enforcement, since you guys were in law enforcement and now are doing, your own security, helping with sex trafficking and making the world a better place. What has law enforcement taught you about being a gentleman, about keeping our kids safe? Just talk to us a little bit about what law enforcement has taught you and how you've tried to take the lessons learned that you've had through the years of that, each of you, and applied that to your own lives and to your family's lives.
Law enforcement was really a choice that I made, and it's kind of cliche, but really in my case, it was really true. I wanted to help people and I wanted to make a difference. And, during my career, I just had some fantastic opportunities with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, really blessed in the jobs that I received and the experiences that I had. It's not a job for everybody. It certainly is something that you have to really navigate very carefully. I think some of us just have the personality that we can see and do the things that we needed to do it, and not have the residual effects that law enforcement sometimes can have on people. I mean, I'm pretty self-aware, and I'm aware that I'm one of those guys that could do that job, not take it home, not let it affect me through addiction or any other avenues of vengeance or anger or taking it out on my family. That was never, I saw that happen. That wasn't me. When I worked in law enforcement, I tried to bring calm to a situation. I worked in the gang unit almost a big portion of my career. So I had an opportunity to work with a lot of youth, and also in a program called SHOCAP, which we identified really the most serious habitual offenders on the streets in Salt Lake County, and focused efforts to try to save them and save the public from them as well through various collaborations. So that was one of the things, and that really got me to interact with a lot of kids, a lot of families, see a lot of different things. It helped me grow. I'm probably one of the only guests you're probably going to have to say, if we talk about being vulnerable, that booked my own son in jail, which is an interesting experience. Now, having said that, there is a caveat to that, and it was really kind of a technical error in the court systems. And we could go into that, but really, he shouldn't have gone to jail. But because he had a felony warrant, it was required booking. So anyway, I had to put him through that experience. So it touched me personally, and I would see it on the street, a lot of things that were going on. But I really learned to, interact with people in a way that I think I always tried to, like Beau said, I've always tried to be calm, and that's just my nature anyway. But I just learned how to really interact with youth in a way that I think that was effective and not and all of our guys in the gang, it really had this kind of mentality. We weren't just the guys. I mean, we did suppression, and we took actions that we needed to do for public safety. At times we needed to do that. But we also played basketball with these guys on the weekends, right? We also went out and interacted with them every day, and if they weren't doing anything wrong, we treated them as humans with respect. I don't think there's one of those kids that I couldn't identify with, because my background, I mean, I was raised by a single mom. My dad was in the military. He was gone all the time. They were divorced. I lived in the streets of Sacramento. That's where I learned a lot of stuff that helped me. That's where my really street awareness came from, because I was one of those kids. I mean, I was running around with other kids in the streets, and we would go downtown Sacramento and, 10, 11 years old, ride the train down there, and we got into a lot of mischief. So, I mean, I could relate to every one of these kids. They all have a story, and a lot of it's really tragic of how they got to where they're at. I mean, and a lot of it you can point right back to fathers in the home, right? And good fathers in the home. And so that helped me, even though I got the caveat of actually putting my son in jail for, he got the express pass, I have to admit, 20 minutes in and 20 minutes out, but he had to go through the booking and procedure. But to see where he has gone in his life and the lesson that taught him, it was a tough day for me. It was a tough day for him, but he really has grown into the type of individual that I'm super proud of. I mean, he's just a fantastic dad, really has done a great job. I've never seen a father that loves his kids in the way that he takes care of his. I mean, his wife works a lot, and he's always there, done whatever he could to bring those kids up in the right way. So some ways I think that we repeat a lot of our patterns in our life, or genetically we're the result of what our fathers experienced, and he's a result of what I've experienced. I mean, and some of those genetic patterns I could see repeating. I did some of the things my father did, and bad decisions that he had made, marriages that he was in that weren't great relationships. And so I could really, in retrospect, look back, and I'm really grateful for every, and I think Beau would say the same thing, for every opportunity that I've had. None of it, I don't look at it as mistakes. I look at it as lessons.
Yeah.
And we can become better people. We can become stronger, but you have to take those lessons in life. We always have lessons to learn, and we can implement those lessons, become greater men, become greater fathers, but you have to learn. They're going to show up, but you got to learn them. And if you don't learn them, you're going to repeat them.
Yeah. You said so many things that I had thoughts to talk to as you went on. One of those things was, you probably as a law enforcement officer saw most people on the worst day of their life.
Absolutely.
Or one of the worst days. There's obviously lessons to be learned whenever law enforcement's involved, right? And to have that empathy that this is not a bad person. This is a person having a bad day. Mm-hmm. This is a person who made
essential
one bad decision that could impact the rest of their life. And to look at them through the eyes of humanity rather than eyes of authority was probably a blessing to everybody that you came into contact with. I loved what you said about the common denominator of fathers. Mm-hmm. A lot of the gangs that you probably dealt with throughout your career, a lot of those people are looking for longing, belonging, family, and a purpose. And unfortunately, gangs give young kids all of those things that they're looking for, that they don't get at home. So, if we can prevent a lot of that from happening, they don't have to go and look outside the home for love and acceptance and belonging. And then I loved what you said about everything. I have, my father-in-law never says the word problem. He calls it a challenge. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think you're right that they're not mistakes, they're lessons. And a lot of it has to do with just changing our vocabulary. If you go back to just the language that we use impacts a lot of what we actually end up thinking. And that actually turns into results. So, Beau, did you want to answer Cory's question too. You probably thought a lot about that while Brett was talking. So
lots of stories came to mind. I try not to be too long. What's interesting about that is the whole, that's what makes good cops. The ability to, I hired and fired hundreds of them. The best cops you could ever have are the ones like this, where they still keep that opportunistic vision of what the world is and what it could be, and how they can help affect that change. I found myself in 2010, it was about January, February of 2010, I found myself in Moab in my truck, in my police truck, and didn't know how I got there. My ex-wife called, and during this time I was running for sheriff of Salt Lake County for the second time. And my wife called and said, "Where are you?" And I must have woke up or whatever happened. I still don't know how I got there. And she says, "Well, where are you?" And I looked around. I don't know. And so I drove around. I'm in Moab. That was a PTSD moment that I can trace back to when I was a 13-year-old child. Because I went to therapy after it and all that kind of stuff. But when I was 13, my dad was very abusive. One night, real quick, I used to listen to their fights, throughout my younger years. I was 13 years old. I just turned 13. My dad body slammed my mom basically on a coffee table, really hard coffee table, broke her back. I got so enraged, I went down, and my dad was a good-sized guy, very good-sized guy, and I don't know where it came from, but I beat him up and put him into the hospital. So I had two parents. They were split at the time. They were divorced at the time. Well, not divorced, but they were split. So I'm taking care of my young brothers, but I never really brought that episode out. And then fast forward, you talk about how we get into law enforcement. Mine was kind of by chance and kind of by, I've always liked to help people. It was that kind of a thing, why do you want to be a police officer? Well, because you want to help them. But come my early career in LA and then coming here, I was involved, as Brett was too, but I was involved in a lot early on in my career without a lot of, you have your training, but early in my career, a lot of deadly force situations where lives are taken. And you see a lot of lives that are taken. Not that, it's like the killing fields. It's just, you see a lot of blood and guts and violence. But I worked in a very violent place, little burg, kind of a burg of a metro, like a microcosm of South Central in a way here in Utah. Anyway, so I was involved in a lot of that. So come back to 2010, when I'm in Moab, and I'm just, during my career, I always wanted to take care of people, and I wanted to take care of my officers to the best of my ability. And it was at that point I learned, going through some therapy at the time, that again, I was always putting myself first. And this was kind of the time when I was getting a divorce. Put myself first before, I'd put everybody else before me, and I wasn't taking care of me. The moral of my story, and I know it was quick and very highlighted, was at that point in time, I realized, why are you running for sheriff? Why'd you run for sheriff before? Why'd you run for Congress? Why'd you do all that? And it really came into my mind is I've always wanted to serve, and I've always wanted to do better than what everybody, I always had the higher expectations, always wanted to do better, always wanted to save lives, just period, whether it was emotionally, physically, mentally, again, fitness, whatever it is, I've always been that kind of a person. And I guess that comes from saving my mom, for all those years listening to her, and the bad example that he wasn't, or he was a horrible example. And so I tell you those little stories that kind of somewhat interconnect. But from that point on, that changed my focus. Focus being a little bit more to me, because to be a good guy, you really got to take a little bit of time for yourself to keep analyzing where you are and how you're going, not be too hard on yourself. We're really hard on ourselves. We all are. And so that's kind of the moral of the story. But then, I always wondered what kind of a dad I was going to be. And oddly enough, a few months ago, my oldest son and my daughter, so my oldest and my number 5, in separate situations, came to me, said, "I need to go to lunch with you." And they both sat down and started saying, these are all the good things that you did, Dad. These are all the great things that you did. We understand, because as a police officer, we kind of come home with some of that stuff. We try not to, but to be we need to converse with our spouses or whoever it is to let them know what the real world is so they understand that, because that's the reason why we're parenting the way we're parenting. You know, you always say that dad cops and mom cops are the worst parents, but they are. They want to keep you in their patrol car or wherever. But back to the whole thing, and it was at that point I understood that, you know, I had taken examples of people that I knew, my coaches, a couple of people that I had worked with, and I know enough about them and how they did and what they did with their children. There's so many good examples out there, and I think we need to use them. And we can't be so confident or overconfident that we can't change and we can't really take on some of those great traits. Pick up a trait from that dad and that gentleman, and that, you know, you learn. And as you get older, as you approach 60, you kind of say, wow, life is not infinite. We wish we knew now what we should have known back when, because that would have made it easier. It just would have, I don't think we would have taken ourselves so seriously and been so hard on ourselves, because there's a lot of good people out. There's a lot of good men out there that are trying to do a good job. They just need some reinforcement. That's all.
Totally. It made me come up with this thought I want to ask both of you. You know, we all think to ourselves at one time or another, oh, I want to do this like my parents did. And I like to do these other things not like they did, right? Whether that be big things or little things, right? And then I think to myself, man, I hope my kids do this like I did. And I hope they don't do some things. Like, I hope that my kids are better than I am, right? Better than I was. So I want to ask both of you, what are some of those things that you hope that, you know, your kids take from you and that you impart to them? And what are some other things where you go, I hope they do this different than I did?
Number one, I hope they will take on a mentality of transcendence, meaning there's things that are much bigger than them that they can be a part of and actually change people's lives. I think the thing that I wouldn't want them to take is what I've talked about, is don't lose yourself. Have that, you know, that hunting trip, have that fishing trip, have that surfing trip.
I would say my dad, he struggled with different addictions in his life. He was a really great guy, a loving guy. Our communication was nonverbal, almost exclusively nonverbal. I would sit in the car for 2 hours and not say a word to my dad. I mean, he knew I loved him, but we wouldn't talk. What I really learned and what I really tried to implement in my life now is that lack of communication can be detrimental. The love might be there, but the expressions maybe aren't in a way that need to be heard. And with my son, who's 31 years old now, when I look back, he's the same way that I was with my father, right? Our communication just wasn't what it should be. I'm an okay communicator. I do it when I need to. It was not a problem in law enforcement. I had command presence when I needed to. I never had a problem outside of the home communicating. I spoke in gang conferences in front of thousands of people. It was my thing. I could do it, and I was okay at it. At home, I struggled. Sometimes just didn't even have the words. I didn't even know what to say. I don't know if it goes back to genetically, how I was pre-wired from what my dad did and how he never spoke to me. And my son knew that I loved him. My daughter knows that I love her. But part of the reason he probably got in trouble is because I didn't have the communication lines with him. And, you know, love really conquers all. And I think we overcame that to some degree. But just like I mentioned before, I do have an opportunity with 15 years difference to really learn what it takes. And in today's world, I don't think you can underscore anymore that we have to communicate with our kids. They are doing things and online and communicating, and we only know because we do these really intense investigations. So many of these kids, even that are trafficked, are conned by catfish, whatever, taken away from their families or whatever in horrible circumstances because they communicated with the wrong person. And I actually have a chance now, an opportunity, and the greatest thing I've learned is, and maybe it's somewhat to do with my daughter's personality, but I have this great opportunity to really dive into her life, communicate with her. She doesn't have a mom that's available to her. It's on me. And my kids had my first 2 kids, their mom's awesome and great communicator. Always talk to them, and sometimes I got to find out what's going on through her. This one's a little bit different, and it's a great opportunity for me really to learn how to communicate. She calls me bro all the time.
That's a generation.
So yeah, I don't know exactly what that means, but so anyway, that's the biggest thing for me that I have really been able to. I love my kids, and I feel like they understand that I love them. But communication is so vital, especially in today's world. You can't give them as much space as you would probably want to give them because the detrimental side of the world and things that they can easily get involved in without knowing is so prevalent.
Those were some pretty awesome answers from both of you. My favorite part of the podcast so far. I think a lot of that happens when we get a little bit real and raw with each other. In our conversation up to the podcast, speaking of real and raw, Brett, you had mentioned that you've had 12 friends take their own lives in law enforcement. And Beau, you'd mentioned that you had gone to therapy. I think these are things that men struggle with. Just getting to the point that you say, I think I should talk to somebody. A lot of times going and talking to somebody prevents you making a horrible decision that will impact the rest of your life and your family's future. What has therapy brought to your life? Did you continue to go to therapy? Are you still doing therapy? How did it help? And then how is the after effects of losing so many of your colleagues? What's that done to you and what you're doing now to prevent it?
Well, back in 2010, I was kind of done with therapy. What it taught me is that I can certainly help a lot of people as well. Some people will identify with me. Some people won't identify. You know, I told you I started doing push-ups and pull-ups about suicide awareness and things like that. And during this time, I buried, we buried officers, we buried firefighters, we buried friends, during that time. And that hasn't stopped, unfortunately. But I'm not going to stop. What I've learned is that a smile, a hi, a text, a phone call, helping somebody with their groceries at the grocery store can change the course of someone's life. I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of phone calls, texts. Personally, I try every day to reach out to somebody I know and maybe I don't know or I haven't seen for a while. Just text them, hey, how you doing? Or call them or do a little video of push-ups and pull-ups just to remind somebody that they matter. They do matter because people get to the point where they don't think they matter. So it taught me that life is, well, law enforcement, I didn't talk a lot about, but law enforcement is it teaches you that life is so fragile. And so if we can bring that, to the folks that don't see that's just that bad part of society, the raw side of society, I think that's an important thing. It continues to humble me to the point of I always return a phone call. I always return a text. And I always ask people that are a part of our little network on social media. It's just kind of a network on social media to always text back, call back, or, if you have this feeling, whether it's spiritual or whether it's just, whatever it is, if you have a feeling about somebody, text them, call them, do something. Hey, how you doing? How you been? You'd be surprised how many times I was thinking about you, or I was thinking, here's where I am. I can't tell you how many times, just off the chart, I've had phone calls. Can you come and talk to me? And I show up to their house, young, old, rich, poor, male, female, black, white, I don't care what it is. They're there in a situation where they've got a gun or a knife or a bottle of pills. They've taken part of it or whatever they've done. And the impact of that, over the years is you don't take any little, you don't take any gesture or anything like, how you doing today? Oh, all right. It has taught me so much. I hope that through what we do and every day, it just affects people to do the same thing. It's not rocket science. We're all on this earth. Life is hard. There's little bits of joy in it. And when those times are hard, all of us can come together and help each other out. I mean, it doesn't matter who we are. You see the biggest of the biggest business people take their lives. You see, and you know what you don't see a lot of? A lot of really destitute, poor people that are just down on their luck and they're on the street. They understand that life is precious. They understand that the next meal is precious. They understand those things. And they, for some reason, it kicks in. They get this opportunistic attitude that they're going to get out of it. And a lot of them do.
I just remember one incident getting called one day. I was a pretty avid softball player at one point in time. They called me from my team, brought me over to a house in west side of Salt Lake, and one of my coworkers was sitting there that I had worked with prior to law enforcement, had a knife stabbed into his heart, touching his heart, holding it on it, and pretty interesting moment in my life where he was on the verge. If he pushed the knife in farther, it would have severed his heart. If he pulled it out, it would cause probably some bleeding that no one could stop. Mm-hmm. So through law enforcement, you have so many different experiences, and I don't mean to harbor just on law enforcement because this is for everybody, but what I love about what Beau was talking about is that, we have really interesting opportunities in law enforcement to intervene in real critical situations in people's lives. And sometimes it's just really small moments. Just to go back to that story, he was not going to allow me to have a conversation with him. So we actually had to bring in the SWAT team, throw a flashbang, and grab him before he did anything with the knife, and ended up saving his life. But we see really tragic things. And the thing that Beau brings up that is just so true is that, we're old school law enforcement, right? We're not millennials. We did this when things were different, right? And when we went, it wasn't okay to talk about your feelings. I literally remember the death of a child when one of our officers had discovered it, a 2-year-old. And a circle of guys getting together. It was a drowning. Child wandered away. Tragic for the family. One of the officers there had a 2-year-old son, started crying, literally was told by the supervisor, "What are you doing? Why are you crying? Are you really crying?" Mocking him because he openly cried during a sort of a regroup, reassessment of what had happened. Our roles were all just kind of standing talking. It was actually chastised for having that kind of a reaction to something, which is really interesting. And so the guys that I know that took their own lives, most of them never gave any indication. We were so accustomed to seeing death and having weapons, and it's death. We almost became callous to it. It was something that happened every single day. Whether it was a child, lady, we responded on every death. So we saw it, became accustomed to us. So if we don't have those interactions with guys, sometimes they were suffering and we never knew it, and that was the real tragedy. Some guys responded to therapy. I was never a guy that felt like I really needed to do, and I did some during my marriage, just kind of to capitulate a little bit to see if I could make things work. And some guys will really respond well to that. But I think what Beau says is, I'm not a person that really feels like PTSD has ever, I've been in critical incidents, a lot of them, not to the extent of what Beau has seen, but I've been in enough, seen, fellow officers die next to me, that type of thing. We go through some bad stuff. Everybody just has to deal with it in their own way. But it's changed in the world. There is really some tools that we can utilize to get ourselves into a better place. And one of the things that, and Beau, I know will agree with this, is good works. You can, when you get out of law enforcement or people are in suffering and you see that happening, you can make a change by doing good. I mean, that can replace any of those things, the suffering that you've seen, the suffering that you have suffered through personally, the tragedy that you have seen. If you can if you can lift yourself up and go help somebody else in some way, that is a game changer. And Beau is the best example of that I know of. He's continually doing that. I've called him when things have been bad. Everybody that I know has called Beau when things are bad, because he's the guy that will hear you and he knows the right things to say. And so I encourage people to do that, just to like Beau said, the small greeting or talking to somebody just to let them know you care can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessary that you've got to go to therapy, that you've got to see a counselor. But as men, we have a hard time asking for help.
Oh, for sure.
Because we think it shows weakness. Mm-hmm. And we've been taught our whole lives that don't be weak. Be strong, be the strength, be the rock. And just because you asked for help from somebody doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, if that message can get through to anybody who's listening, who might be thinking any of these thoughts, suicidal thoughts, or that they're worthless or that they don't matter, reach out to somebody and show that strength by asking for the help that you need. Mm-hmm. Because our society has taught us the opposite of what we really need to do. And we can be proactive as friends to reach out and send those texts and those calls, but sometimes you can hide it so well that nobody knows, just like all of your friends that you never saw. Any indication that they could take their own life. We've been taught to hide it and to bury it. And so sometimes it is on us. Sometimes it's on us to say, I need help because I've thought these things. Mm-hmm. And are you okay if I call you if I have those thoughts again? Like, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's hopefully what you do. So if you're listening to the podcast and you feel that way, reach out. Heck, reach out to us. info@thegentlemanproject.com.
Well, guys, unfortunately, we're running out of time, because I think we could talk about your backgrounds more. We could ask you about 1,000 more questions, but we do end the podcast with the similar question every time. And that is, what does it mean to you to be a gentleman?
Well, I'll tell you, for me, it really comes down to expressing and having true love for your fellow man and how you treat them in any circumstance. Do you love your fellow man, and do you treat him equally, and do you treat him fairly? Love your fellow man, and you're treating him respectfully. You are a gentleman. Can't
beat that one. The end. The only thing I can think of that's so true is examples of being a gentleman. Nothing wrong with opening the door. Nothing wrong with chivalry. In these days, some places it's not wanted, but I think it still is. I think for most women and most people that way, I think that's an important thing to show. And I think we can teach our children by example, opening doors and, being polite. And I think it also has to do with respect. I think if you can love and respect, like he said, your fellow man, your fellow humans, then I think you're a gentleman. I think you can be a gentleman. I think you can not be a gentleman and become a gentleman if you want to. I know there's a lot of non-gentlemen out there. Real men. I don't think there's a lot of men that can't handle that. And I think if they were to really self-analyze themselves and really have an ability to actualize themselves, I think that they would find their life so much more enriched. I think, if you know who you are and what you stand for and you're willing to take a punch and get knocked on your butt and then show your kids how you can do that, that's a gentleman too.
Well, I think you're right. And that's why we asked that question. Is when my boys asked me that question, I didn't know it was bigger than one sentence. It was bigger than 5 minutes. It was bigger than an hour-long conversation. that's why the Gentleman Project exists, is because I thought this is going to be more than one conversation.
Absolutely.
And I want to make sure that I define this well for my kids. Thanks for adding your take on what it means to be a gentleman to us and the audience. We hope you've enjoyed this. We would also like to, we didn't even talk at all about True. Would you guys like to give a plug? Or I know you guys are new in the 501c3 space with True. And if you want to get people involved, if people want to become involved with True, tell them what it is and how they become involved.
True's a really end-to-end approach to human trafficking. And we're trying to get really a ready reserve force of people interested in sex trafficking everywhere, from literally helping us to enforce or go out and intervene in actual sex trafficking scenarios with the ready. And so we have a tactical center where we can help people to learn to what to see and also tactically be prepared to intervene when they are called upon. We call that our executive training that we do. And then there's also a component where we're doing SAFE, and that is where we're teaching kids to not only be aware, but also how to run and how to protect yourself, and also how to talk about the experiences that they might have had, so that they can expose some of the circumstances they might find themselves in, not to keep it to themselves. And then there's a component we call RISE, which is recover, integrate, serve, and employ. So not only do we want to fix what's happened, but give them self-esteem and some employment and some therapeutics experiences along the way. Recovery from sex trafficking, the people that have truly been victimized by it, is a lifelong endeavor. It is the most tragic and heartbreaking thing. It would take a whole nother show to really tell you about the things that we've seen and the kind of victimization some of these children have experienced. But we're looking at a comprehensive approach, and True is our way to do it. We're really excited about it. We're going to come out with chocolate bars and some coffee and all kinds of things for revenue generation, so that we can put it all back into the program. This is not to enrich ourselves, but it's truly because we recognize a need that is happening, and we have the skills, the mentality to work.
How do they get involved if they want to learn more about True? Where would you direct them?
Well, we can direct them to our website. We have the website. I don't know if we've got True Rescue.
TrueRescues.com is where. So we're looking for people who want to go through tactical training to be a ready reserve force, and that might be CEO level guys.
Executive level, yeah.
3-day training. We're looking for people to come and join in the educational process. We want to put people in schools and churches to teach awareness, not just awareness, but if they've been involved or it's happened to them, to talk about it. And the next thing as well is we want them to be able to defend themselves in the case that we're teaching kids to get away from it as quickly as possible. In some circumstances, they might have to fight back to some degree. So we want people involved in the education process. We want people that are actively aware of sex trafficking and can actually intervene or support our operational units in the field, and have the experience and the wherewithal and the street awareness to be able to actually do that. So we want those people placed throughout the globe, really. That's what our end-all objective is. And so they can go to the website.
TrueRescue.com. We're on social media right now. We'll have social media pages for True. So yeah,
sounds
right
like
now,
we might need to have you back on again and talk about True as just its own show, teaching our kids how to stay safe. What a dark corner of the world you guys spend time in. Thank you for your service in law enforcement. Thanks for your service and helping to protect our innocent kids. And thanks for coming on the show today. I learned a lot. I've got a couple new friends out of this, and we appreciate your time. We hope that you've enjoyed the show as well. If you've gotten value out of the show today, please share it with somebody that you love. If you heard something, or if somebody's name popped into your head as you were listening to the podcast today, share it with them. Give them a call, shoot them a text, and be a good friend. Reach out and be that lady or gentleman in somebody's life today. We appreciate you guys listening. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Be a gentleman.